Hello and welcome to A Patient God, a series focusing on an oft-overlooked characteristic of God, His patience. And if there's anything we need in our current climate, it's godly patience. Unless noted, all references are from the World English Bible. I picked it because it is reasonably modern sounding and it carries no copyright restrictions. Let's get started. There are some Bible verses that make you stop and go, what? One of those is Philippians chapter 3 and verse 12. And I'd like to, as we introduce this, go through this verse in various translations to see kind of the translator's attempts to give us an idea of what this verse means. So I'm going to start way back with the American Standard Version from 1901. Again, Philippians 3, verse 12. Not that I have already obtained, or am already made perfect, but I press on, if so be that I may lay hold on that for which also I was laid hold on by Christ Jesus. Doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? Unless you've really studied this passage. Lay hold on that for which also I was laid hold on? What? Let's try the New King James. Not that I have already obtained, or am already perfected, but I press on, that I may lay hold on that, for which Christ Jesus has also laid hold of me. Okay, at least it's not as verbose, but you still have this laying hold, and who is doing what, and how does it go together? Let's try the ESV. Not that I have already obtained this or am already perfect, but I press on to make it my own because Christ Jesus has made me his own. Now this is, if you've read a lot of the ESV, you know that the ESV really tries to simplify things. I think sometimes to a fault. And maybe that's what's going on here. I think they've got the main idea correct, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But I think they lose some of the nuance with it. So what is this verse saying? I don't want to leave you hanging. My idea after looking at this, and it's an idea I came up with not that long ago actually, is that Jesus and Paul here have the same goal. Jesus is grabbing hold of Paul, and Paul in turn is grabbing hold of Christ. Christ grabs a hold of us because he wants us to be his children, or wants us to be his brothers and sisters, wants us to be God's children. And we in turn grab onto him because that's what we want as well. It's this idea of a common purpose, a common understanding, a common desire. But sure takes a while to get that out of this verse, doesn't it? Now, that's not the verse I want to talk about, but it gives us an introduction because the verses I want to talk about have the same kind of problem. They are difficult to understand at first glance. Let's go back to Genesis, the book of Genesis, chapter 22, and we'll be reading verses 11 and 12. So while you're getting that up, or maybe you're going to read along with me on the screen, let's set the stage. Abraham, who is well over 100 years old at this point, he has a son that's been promised, and he is told by God at the beginning of chapter 22 to take his son Isaac to a mountain and sacrifice him. And in the lead up to this verse, he goes to the mountain with Isaac. He goes up on the mountain with Isaac. He binds his son, lays him on the wood to be his sacrifice, and is about to kill him. And we get this verse. Here's verses 11 and 12. Yahweh's angel, and by the way, the World English Bible, it has a couple of quirks to it. One is that where most translations will say Lord or the Lord in all caps, and the old ASV will say Jehovah, the World English Bible went with Yahweh, which is closer to the Hebrew sound of the word, or at least the best we can approximate. It does that, and it also, you'll notice, if you're a longtime Bible reader, you may hear some contractions, and that threw me, admittedly, the first time I tried to read the World English Bible or WEB, but bear with me. I think it works. So Genesis 22 verses 11 and 12. Yahweh's angel called to him out of the sky and said, Abraham, Abraham. He said, Here I am. He said, Don't lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. No, think about that phrase, now I know, for just a moment. Now I know. This is an infinite and all-knowing God that we're talking about. He's known Abraham all his life. He knew of Abraham way before Abraham was born. And yet he says, now I know. Makes you wonder. So what is really going on here? Let me give you my opinion on this. The Abraham of Genesis 22 and verse 11 is not the same Abraham that started this chapter. Sure, he's only aged about 3 days, three or 4 days at most. But this is not the same Abraham, because the Abraham in verse 11 has different experiences than the Abraham of verse 1. He's had the experience now of having his faith tested up to the point of raising the knife and being ready to kill his son. This is a different Abraham. This is the living embodiment of what 1 Peter chapter 1 verses 6 and 7 says. That passage says, In this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while, if need be, you have been grieved in various trials, that the proof of your faith, which is more precious than gold that perishes, even though it is tested by fire, may be found to result in praise, glory, and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ. That the proof of your faith may be found to result in praise, glory, and honor. The idea here is that Abraham's faith was not a static thing. It wasn't just a constant in his life. Now, that he had faith was a constant in his life for all the time we knew him. But his faith, by verse 11 of chapter 22, is not quite the same faith in verse 1. It has grown deeper because it has been tested. It has been proved by fire. Something similar happens in Matthew chapter 14 and verse 33. This is when Jesus has come to the disciples walking on water, and he comes into the boat and they say, You are truly the Son of God. Well, they knew that, didn't they? Yes, they did know that, but it has been proven to them, and their understanding of Jesus has grown through that event, through that experience. So what can we learn about God in this? I think it is clear that God is not interested in us in a single point in time. That is, it's not just when you are baptized or not when something happens to you that God is interested in. He is interested in you over time. He is interested in me over time. Not just who we are, but who we can become. And no one knows who we can become like God does. When we talk about Abraham, one of the things we like to talk about is how Abraham waited. And boy, did he wait. He was 75 years old when God called him out in chapter 12 of Genesis. He's 75 then. He's 100 when Isaac is born. And there's things along the way that Abraham does to try to speed things along, to try to help God out. But in the end, he waits 25 years for his son. But let's turn it around. God, you could say, has waited a lot longer by the time of chapter 22, and we don't know exactly how old Abraham is at that point. Maybe 115, 120, somewhere in that range. Isaac is not just a little boy at this point. He's grown up at least some, enough to carry some wood. And yet here we have God working through Abraham, even if we just take from 75 years old and up. I mean, God has been working with him for his whole life. But just take it from when he's 75, when we first meet Abraham. From 75 to say 115, 40 years at this point, God has been working with Abraham, revealing things to him, promising things to him, delivering things to him, and testing him. That this statement that now I know that you fear me, that you fear God, is the result of what we know of as, give or take, 40 years of effort on God's part, of building Abraham up to the point where his faith was such that he would not withhold his son from God if God required his son of him. What does it say? It says that God is patient. We don't normally think about God that way, at least I don't. God being patient with us, God working with us, God working on us, God working with our situations to bring us to greater faith, to bring us closer to what he envisions that we can be in this life. And of course, to bring us closer to where we're ready to step through the door and into his presence. And that patience, that willingness to work with someone, that ability that God has to see us, not as we are, but as what we can become, is what I want us to study in this series. So what we're going to do is, in the first few lessons, we're going to look at people in the Old and New Testament with whom God showed patience. Now, maybe it was patience over a period of time. Maybe it was patience in a particular moment. But this idea that God sees beyond a particular moment, a person at a particular point in time, and sees what they can become, I think will give us a lot of encouragement. Well, also, as we go along, we'll see cases where people showed great patience, great forbearance, great long-suffering in waiting for people to grow, or in helping people to grow, and not just seeing people where they are. And then we'll look at how you and I can reflect God's patience in our lives. Reflect it in how we look at each other, how we deal with each other, and how we can have that kind of patience and seeing not just other people for who they are in a given moment, but who they can become, which is so important. Now, who exactly we're going to study is still something I'm working out. I have some ideas. If you would like to contribute to that, please feel free to comment. If you're watching on YouTube, please comment to this video and I'll see it. There should also be a link in the description that will give you an email address that you can email us, and that will get to me. If you have someone you really want me to cover, please let me know. I'm open to new ideas. I want to cover this as broadly as I can. And if you have any other thoughts, any other suggestions, please use those means to let us know, to let me know, and I'll do my best to incorporate them. Thank you for joining me today. A Patient God is written, recorded, and produced by me, Eric Peterson. I'm a member of the Campbell Road Church of Christ in Garland, Texas. We'd love for you to join us whenever you're in our area. If you want to learn more about us, you can find us at our website, thebibleway.com. The music was recorded at our annual singing back in 2018. The song is Wonderful Story of Love by J.M. Driver. Thanks, and see you next time.